Alright, hopefully the sound of the rain isn't picking up too much. We can get through this with no problems. So last week we talked about the Pacino City Lumet partnership with Dog Day Afternoon, so I figured now would be a good time to just go right into another one I've been planning on doing for a while, which was this one. And even though we do have that Pacino Lumet segue, and Serpico is clearly considered one of like the ultimate cop movies of all time, I actually want to start with Copland, if you don't mind. So, Copland is brought to us by James Mangold, the guy with probably one of the most diverse filmographies in movie history, but most recently, obviously, has been known for taking over the Wolverine character and giving us the Wolverine and, obviously, most recently, Logan, and receiving a lot of acclaim, but, yeah, this one, he also wrote the script single-handedly for this one, and this was about, what, 1997, I want to say? I'm not positive, but it was certainly in that area. And this was at a time where our hero, a lot of the time, was Sylvester Stallone, but the interesting thing that Copland did was made Stallone a hero, for sure, but in a definitely a much more different way than we have been used to, especially in the 90s era there. Um, because we'll actually start with Stallone because he's really the center of the movie here in a very large array of characters. Because the whole, more or less, the whole concept is we're in this city that is entirely, almost completely, entirely overrun by dirty cops, and Stallone is the sheriff who couldn't quite make it into the police department and just kind of has to watch from the sidelines, kind of wishing that's where he was. Um, but weirdly enough, this makes him the most trustworthy character in the movie, pretty much. I guess there is a certain kind of moral stance you have to look at here in regards to what exactly he knows about what goes on, because it's clear that he's got an idea of the corruption, but it's the matter of how deep the corruption goes and how bad it gets. But like, say if Harvey Keitel is going 70 in like a school zone, he'll just let it fly. But obviously he starts to realize very quickly that there's something a lot more sinister afoot with these guys, with Keitel and Robert Patrick and all them. And the thing about this character is that this is like, I mean, yeah, sure, he's got knowledge of corruption, it's to an extent, but like the worst thing we see him do in this movie is like one of his first scenes, and it's when he opens up the parking meter to get quarters so he can play the pinball machine. It's like that's about as bad as he gets. That's about as illegal as he gets. So for the and especially when you look at some of the other characters in this movie, he's clearly one of the closest things we get to more or less a clean soul. Um, and it's also interesting that he's got a couple of side stories here, but one of which is the whole reason that he can't get into the police department is the fact that he lost the hearing in one of his ears. But the story goes is that he lost the hearing in his ear because he was saving Annabelle Sciorra from a car accident when they were younger. So in this kind of heroic act, ultimately sacrificing the hearing in his ear and his dream of working in the police department, he kind of not only saved her, but he kind of saved himself too, because it's one of those cases to where it's like, should he not have saved her, and should his hearing have been okay, and should he have joined the police department, would he be more along the lines of the rest of Keitel's guys? And it's kind of one of those things where it's interesting to kind of imagine if this is a guy that could have been, because clearly we learn by the end he can be pushed to a certain degree. It's just the question is what direction is he going to get pushed, and what exactly is the reasoning for that. So that's kind of an interesting thing to mull over, and I actually kind of like that it's a bit ambiguous to where, I mean, somebody could probably say this, watch this and say like, oh yeah, I know he would have, even if he was in the police department, he would never have been with Harvey Keitel's guys for sure. But I don't know for sure. So I really like that we don't, that there's no real clear answer to that. But the thing about this the most is that in regards to his moral stance and kind of letting the corruption happen, that he sees There's just kind of that whole powerless thing. Like, it's pretty much just like, I can't do anything about this, and I don't want to, necessarily start even more trouble than there already is, so I'll be the guy that just kind of waves off and lets everything be its thing, and just hopefully it's not too bad. Um, and I do think there's definitely, an understanding we can take from there. Like, there is, I mean, when it's like a large portion of the police force, what is this one guy really going to be able to... I know he's played by Sylvester Stallone, but this isn't that kind of movie. This is a different Stallone for sure. But he's definitely able to show off that likability that he was able to show off so well in, like, the Rocky movies. And bring that as a strength to this character, to where we can kind of understand the powerless stance that he's coming from, without necessarily turning on him and saying, why isn't he doing more? I think it's clear when we see the big picture. There is a very good reason why he can't do more than he does, because he's got Janine Garofalo, and he's got Noah Emmerich, and that's about it. And obviously they're going to walk all over Janine Garofalo for being a woman. There's a very patronizing scene with Keitel where he, like, calls her Cupcake or something. Or that might have been Robert Patrick, actually, but regardless, in the same area. And yeah, Noah Emmerich's one of those... I mean, he can play a bad guy pretty well, too, but Noah Emmerich is very good at playing nice guys, and he's definitely one of those here. So yeah, point being, this little department that Stallone has doesn't stand a chance with the stuff that Harvey Keitel's got going on. And while we're speaking on him, it's worth noting that if it's not enough that it does feel like a really nice crime story and sets up a really nice crime world, I like that Mangold kind of added that whole thing by bringing in so many Scorsese actors. Because we've got Harvey Keitel, which is obvious, De Niro, which is obvious, Liotta is obvious, there's Kathy Moriarty, who worked with him on Raging Bull, and Frank Vincent from Goodfellas and Casino. He kind of got the jump on, what's his name, Arthur Nascarella, who would end up being in Bringing Out the Dead. And speaking of him, he also got the jump on Sopranos actors, because there's him plus Annabelle Shore, and then Edie Falco has one scene at the beginning with Liotta. So it all kind of feels like it almost kind of feels like it's all in the same world, because you're seeing all the same faces and the Scorsese world, the Sopranos world, and then this just right in the center. And it all just kind of has this nice, big, giant, corrupt, crime-infested world to it. So I really like that. And yeah, you'll notice that we have a whole web of characters here going through that cast list. And the thing that makes this movie so interesting is that a lot of these characters are just kind of on the side, more or less, but most of, if not all of them, feel worthy of their own stories. To where it's like, we could completely branch off. We could just have Stallone here, and the little love story, and him trying to keep things in order here. There is, I could see an entire movie with Keitel as the lead character, and the way he basically runs this whole town with all these people that he knows, because they keep saying, like, he knows everybody. He is unstoppable, because he's just got everybody in every single pocket that he's got. Then there's the plot with Michael Rappaport as the hero cop that they kind of sweep under the rug when he more or less accidentally kills a couple of dudes. I use the word accidentally lightly, but it was a whole clusterfuck, how that ended up happening. But then there's also a lot of characters, like, the ones that they kind of seem like they don't really need any more elaboration, yet they still kind of somehow make an impact. Like Robert Patrick, for instance. Like, Robert Patrick is such a side character to kind of like a continuation of Keitel's character, more or less, where it's like, I wouldn't necessarily see a full story about him, but he clearly makes an impact in his scenes. And then there's stuff like, I think Monica is her name, the girl that lives with Liotta. And it's like, we see her once at the bar at the very beginning, and she's very soft-spoken, and she doesn't do a whole lot. She just more or less makes her presence known in a quiet way and then disappears. And then it's later used to antagonize Liotta. But apart from that, there's not really a whole lot to her. Just that little surface thing that we know. And then there's the later scene when Leota's house burns down and she's inside it, and we watch her die. And it's like, even though we really didn't know this character at all, there's something so tragic about this scene, especially with the way Leota reacts to it. To where it's its own big emotional high point in the movie, and this is a character we barely knew, yet somehow it still kind of feels earned, because we do feel that, even if we didn't really know the character that well. And even in Leota's case, like, you could say, well, maybe it's because of the connection with Leota is what made the scene so powerful, but even as great as Leota is amazing in this, but I still feel like Figgis is a really underused character. Like, he's got a lot going on. I really love this thing he's got going on with Keitel, that feud, with the whole other side plot about the cop that got killed a couple of years ago, and it's like, that in itself is a story that you really want to see branch off into more, and that's basically what the whole movie is a bunch of stories that you want to desperately see more of, but there's only so much time the movie has. The movie's only like an hour 45, but it's got all these different things going on. And some of them seem a bit like, maybe if we had more elaboration they'd be more interesting, but here they kind of feel a bit tacked on, kind of like the relationship between Randone and Kathy Moriarty, and the fact that he's cheating on Annabelle Shore, the girl that he ultimately saved in his past, and she is the wife of Keitel, and that's like, there's a whole kind of soap opera thing going on here. But yeah, Randone's another character, because once again, Peter Berg is really good in this too, and very memorable. I love that he had such a connection with the character that he even brought that back in Very Bad Things, when they have the cop named Randone, and Christian Slater looks at his badge and says his name exactly the way Method Man does to him in this. But once again, it seems like there's only so much we can go into, and it does feel like some things in here are going to get the short end, but I still have a really great appreciation for just how massive it makes the movie feel, because it's got all these different things going on in it, even if some of them aren't near as impactful as some of the other parts of it. And yeah, the side plot with Shiora is nice, and it gives, like, Freddy kind of a nice, sweet little subplot here, and the love story and all that, but once again, it does just kind of feel like a bit of an afterthought. But once again, I don't mind that it's in there, because I like what it brings to Freddy's character on top of what else is going on with him, so yeah, all of that works too. And while this is so busy with its characters and all their different stories, it definitely has time for some genuinely suspenseful stuff. One immediately I just have to bring up is the scene when Rappaport figures out that Keitel and his guys are going to kill him, or they're planning to kill him, and when they lure him out to the backyard, and it's like, even though I know how that scene plays out, because I've seen it so many times, and even though I know that ultimately Rappaport survives the movie, this scene gives me so much anxiety. Every time he gets closer to the pool, the guys kind of start to close in around him. Randone shows up and makes things even more hectic. And yeah, it's just this whole thing, and I love the scenes that play out like that. There's a couple of other kind of standoff-like scenes, kind of like the scene towards the end when Freddy gets attacked, and then the ending shootout as well. Are just really great moments in this. I love watching what happens. I can maybe understand if people think that the movie as a whole doesn't quite add up to what the climax ends up being. But I do. I get it. I'm totally fine with the climax. I love the way it plays out, and I think it really does work, because we're kind of watching Freddy get pushed through the whole movie, like I was saying. Because the thing is that the whole idea is that Freddy is kind of constantly in danger of going to the dark side, for lack of a better term. And like when he meets Frank Vincent at the faux funeral, we kind of get the idea that he may possibly be getting closer to the police department than he ever thought he could. And there's always the question of what, obviously we were saying, what would happen if that happened. But the thing is that Freddy does start getting pushed to a dark side, but it's not their dark side, it's his own dark side. Um, and so we really, and when we have, like, because he's, idolized these guys. Like, he looks at people like Keitel and he says, that's where I want to be. So he's loyal to them, as we see. He just lets things fly. But then when he realizes how deep it goes, and he realizes that that loyalty was betrayed, then we can see when he finally realizes there is no other answer. Keitel is too powerful. This is the only way to stop this, is with bullets. There's no other way. And I like the little foreshadowing to that, to where it's like, we don't really see Freddy with a gun or doing anything particularly violent throughout the movie. But then he goes to the carnival, and it turns out he is, like, a perfect shot. And so it's like, well, that's coming back. It's like, he's going to use this talent, I just know it. So yes, and so yeah, honestly, I think it's a pretty big compliment to a movie when the biggest criticism you can give it is it needs to be longer. We need more of these stories. We don't get quite enough of them, but we love what we see. So I think that's what makes this movie really work. Like, I understand if there's a criticism to where it's like, maybe there's too much going on. Like I said, there are some stuff to where it kind of seems like they don't quite give it enough attention for it to seem totally relevant, like the Rando and Kathy Moriarty side plot, for instance. But, yeah, that's, I do think it gives us more than enough, to think that this is a really, really great crime movie. And I don't know, I know some people that know it well, but I don't know if it, and I think it was popular at the time that it came out. I'm not quite sure where its popularity lies these days. You don't really hear much of anything about it, but, I still think it's really strong, and it's, I mean, there are some moments when, sure, it does feel a bit disjointed. One scene that never really worked for me was, the scene where it's implied that Rappaport jumps off the bridge, even though we very quickly find out that's not actually the case, but it's the way Keitel plays it. Because, worth noting, Keitel is great in this. I really love this character. He is such a fucking cold-blooded villain in this. But in those scenes when he, like, talks in the bar and he, like, lays everybody down and he, like, lectures them, just really great stuff. There is that moment when he comes back and he's like, he jumped. But it's like, and I get that he's lying, so maybe it's supposed to come off unconvincing, but it's like, you would think the character of Ray would be a bit more inclined to play it up, like he's legitimately shocked that this happened. But the whole scene, it's so obvious this is like a setup, when really he should be trying to hide it, but it feels a little clumsy, this scene, which kind of sucks because it's the thing that sets everything off. But as the movie unrolls, it's hardly a problem. And obviously there is, one might say a bit of relevance, in regards to, the whole Dirty Cops thing and what they get away with and all that. I think it's who knew? It's a Miramax movie about open secrets. So, take that for what you will. But, yeah, so, and one person I didn't really go into in the cast, because he has a surprisingly small role, is De Niro. But I do think De Niro, I remember the first time I saw this, I thought they had wasted De Niro, but as I've watched it more over time, I do like the fact that all of De Niro's scenes are strong. Like, he only has, like, maybe a handful, but every scene he's in feels very crucial when he plays it, just to that effect. So, yeah, so with a cast this big, you've got a whole lot of standouts, and with all these different stories webbing around, I think as a whole, it does work. If there's one other problem I'd have, it would be that, it's funny, I keep saying, make the movie longer, but if I have one more complaint, it would be that, I feel like the very last scene kind of takes the power out of what could have been the ending. And I understand why it's there, with Stallone kind of looking out and Noah Emmerich showing up and saying, hey, there's something going on, let's go. And then he goes off and does his thing. But I always thought it just would have been really powerful. It would have just kind of stayed how it was, how it seemed to be ending, with the big, cop movie music playing as the radio was playing over the audio, telling us, wrapping up all the stories basically. Like, you could have just rolled credits over that, but I get why they added that last scene, and it's fine. But I think it would have had just a little bit more power if we stopped at the panning over the city with that music, with the radio telling us everything. But whatever. So, going on to Serpico, as I said, this is yet another true story brought to us, true story from the 70s, brought to us by Pacino starring in it and Sidney Lumet directing. And this, once again, obviously has a lot to live up to because it has this enormous reputation for being one of the ultimate cop movies, and the question is does it hold up to that title? And the main thing you want to look at here is, the movie is called Serpico, and sometimes when you see a movie that's title is just the last name of the main character, you think, well, that's kind of a bland title, but I'm sure the movie's good. There is a perfectly good reason why this movie is called Serpico, and that is that this movie is this character, and this movie is Pacino's performance. And you really don't need to look that far beyond that, and it's enough. So when we start off, obviously, well, there's the opening, obviously, but then when we're starting off chronologically, we have very young-looking Panic at Needle Park Pacino here. Just got back from the war, Michael Corleone. And when he first appears, it's very clear he's going to be the young, overachieving type. Which isn't a bad thing, but he's the guy where he comes into the police force, and he's ready to go. And he doesn't quite know what he's in for. Much like the characters in Copland. So, well, I guess these would be much like the characters in Serpico, but you get what I mean. There's a call, and there's a ruckus going on, a potential rape. And Serpico's like, well, we'll take that. It's not in our jurisdiction, but I mean, I heard the call. I'm going to take it. I don't care if my partner here is like half asleep. I'm just going to do it because that's what I'm here to do. And he thinks it's the right thing to do, not realizing just how out of place that is in this world, unfortunately. And the thing about it is, once this goes on, we learn very quickly that he's one of those cop characters that is resented from both sides. Because obviously because, he's a cop, people kind of see this, not only is it the criminals are going to see the cops in a bad light because they're criminals, but also just everybody is aware of this mass corruption. So basically, if you're wearing the uniform, you're under the umbrella. So, but then from the other side, obviously the cops who are corrupt and being paid off and don't really give a fuck are not going to like how persistent Serpico is. So it's like, and just the small things tip us off immediately. Before he even knows what's going on, before he's even ready to say, hey, what you guys are doing is wrong, it's just the little things that get under their skin about him, where they kind of know quickly that he's going to be a problem for them. Like, a roast beef sandwich has never in history been more telling than how somebody is going to feel working along with his peers. And just in this moment, when it's like, just take the free shit. We do this guy favors, he does us favors. But he just takes it a step further, and he's like, oh no, I'll even pay for the roast beef sandwich because I'm that kind of guy. I'm like, no man, you done fucked up already just for asking for it. And it's like, we already know you're going to be an issue, and this is a continuous thing. And then it goes on also, of course, we're in the 70s, where things haven't quite gotten to where they are today. So when Serpico is in a bathroom with another guy with the lights out, people draw conclusions that are untrue, but are easy to make, and that's something that may or may not come back around a couple of times. So it's clear they're out to get him just in these kind of ways, but then obviously as the movie goes on, this is going to get more and more intense as it goes, and they're going to find more and more reasons to hate this guy, and we're just going to go from there. But neither one, that's the thing, is neither one of these are going to budge from their position. So it's what plays out after that. And it's also one of those things where it's really fun to watch Pacino's evolution, because obviously there was the whole thing about Serpico was a whole, you know, if we're going to take them down, we got to look like them. We can't be showing up in our uniforms. We got to blend in. So he's going to basically grow his hair out and look like a criminal. He starts off with the mustache. There's like, just when you see the cut from when he's clean shaven to when he has the mustache, you're like, oh shit, he's getting seasoned already. He's like, he's all, oh no, he's gonna be one of them, isn't he? But then they immediately tell him to shave it, which of course he basically tells them to stick up their ass. And then it's like, you can tell the more seasoned, the more into it he is, the more hair he has. Both the head and the face. And then it's one of those cases where it's like, it becomes this kind of surreal image throughout the movie where it's the guys that are the bad guys are the ones in the cop uniforms and the suits, and the one that's the good guy is the one that's dressed as and looks like a criminal. He's got the dirty clothes, he's got kind of the hippie jewelry, he's got the long beard, and it's the long hair, and it's really weird to watch this when you keep those things in mind. That imagery that you typically feel like you see reversed, Serpico just really turned around and really showed it in an interesting way. And then it's one of those cases where you do feel for him quickly. I mean, he obviously becomes a very erratic character, but as it goes on, he certainly is sympathetic because obviously, just in general, he's against corruption in this very corrupt world. That clearly makes him an easy protagonist to root for. But it's like, when he first tries to transfer, and we realize it's like he's living a bad dream. Because, like, this is the way, much like Freddy in Copland, he saw the police department as this thing to be, and it was going to be this protective thing, and this was the dream to do this. And so he goes, and he realizes there's this corruption going on, and these guys are real shady, so he's like, well, I'll change precincts. And when he changes, it's like, it's either going to be the same thing, or it's going to be worse. And it's like he's trapped in a dream, in a bad dream he can't get out of. And it's like the world comes crashing down, and it's like this whole thing is unveiled. It's sort of like The Matrix, when you see it as this one thing, and then all it takes is like one bit of exposition or information for you, and suddenly it's like the whole thing is ripped off, and it's this whole dirty ass world you didn't know was here. And just watching him crumble as he realizes this. He's crumbling, but he's also becoming stronger at the same time, because he's definitely not the dude that ordered the roast beef sandwich that had the clean face at the beginning of the movie. By no means. By 45 minutes into this movie, he's this. Yeah, and obviously, it's... The interesting thing about watching this also is that Pacino tends to be known for his whole screaming thing. Like, a lot of people would consider Pacino probably an overactor. But the thing about it is that he really finds a balance here, because obviously as he gets more and more thrust into this, the more the more helpless he feels towards it, and the more alone he feels, the more angry he's going to get, and like I said, the more erratic he's going to get. Making the people around him miserable, or the girl that loves him even. But the thing is that there is a lot of stuff that Pacino does with this performance, to the point that he's calm enough to the point that when he does have the outbursts that we know Pacino for having, they're very jarring and sudden, because Serpico for a long time is a calm character, and he's trying to deal with this in the calmest way possible, really trying to avoid that dark side, I imagine. And so because of this, they're able to show, like, just like when they show him doing these things around his house, they just throw in little things like that. But then, once again, there are those moments where he snaps, like, when one of his fellow cops doesn't quite recognize him because he looks so much like one of the criminals, and they just start shooting without really looking or warning or anything. And Serpico calls him out and says, if I buy one, you're not going to be the motherfucker that does it, or something like that. So that's kind of that's kind of where we start to see the real turning point, but then obviously it gets more and more intense as it goes, and it's like, the intensity in this movie doesn't necessarily come from the situations. There's certainly some suspenseful scenes for sure, but I mean, the real intensity of this movie is watching Serpico change. And that's not just an ode to the way the movie's made and the kind of unconventional way the movie's made. It's watching Pacino do this. This was his second Oscar nomination after The Godfather. He ultimately ended up losing to Jack Lemmon for Save the Tiger, which, yeah, I haven't seen Save the Tiger for a long time, so I can't really say for sure. But it's all there's a lot of competition. It's really hard to read, but yes, what Pacino does here is extreme. Like I said, it's the strength of the whole movie, I think. But the thing also is that watching him get consumed by this is where it's like, the tragic thing about it is he's doing as much as he can to... Obviously, Serpico has no intentions of being one of the corrupt. None whatsoever. But the problem is that he gets so consumed by this and so obsessed with it and changing it and making things the way they should be, that even though he doesn't join them, it still, in a way, claims him. It still claims his life, even if he's not a part of it. They just kind of indirectly... He's still not on their side, but he's pulled in by it to where that's all his life is. And it's like, after a while, you start to wonder which is worse. And so that definitely, I feel, makes him a tragic figure. Obviously not tragic enough that, like, I mean, it's not like he dies, thankfully, but it's... Yeah, and it is, like I was saying, it's basically like him watching the death of a dream as this happens. So we do understand where he's coming from, but, and there's the scenes like, what's the guy's name, Rudy, when, he, like, there's just something very civil about it, and he comes off like one of the other guys, where it's like, well, he's doing something illegal, I won't even put him in cuffs, I'll just put him in the car, and we'll just drive off, and we'll just, talk like we're normal guys, and then he gets all the way to the station, lets him, mingle or whatever, and then fucks his ass up and throws him in the cell, and it's just one of those big moments to where we realize that Serpico is not gonna fuck around with this, and he's gonna make sure everybody knows he's not fucking around with it. And like I said, it's really what makes the movie is watching Pacino morph throughout the whole movie as one cop into an entirely different one, and it's the system itself that has made him this person. And it's one of those interesting things where it's like you watch the opening, and it's like, for like somebody that would go in blind, they would see this guy that looks like a criminal with a bullet in his face bleeding out, and everybody's calling everybody up and saying Serpico got shot in the fucking face. And it's like, we see people talking about this, and it's kind of like, if you were to go in blind and you don't realize that Pacino's playing a cop, it's kind of like, well, was this some crime boss or something? He's like dressed like a criminal, he looks like a criminal, but it's like, and all the cops are being let in. It's obviously a huge deal that this guy got shot. But then of course we know he's a cop, and then we start to see that all the cops being called, it's almost like a relief to them to get the news that Serpico has been shot. It could have been the point that we've gotten to in this point in the story. So it's interesting the way they decided to start there and then bring us back to that when we see what the cops are really thinking when in regard to this news and this turn of events. And so, yeah, and it's obviously, it's my understanding that obviously the whole corrupt thing, the police corruption thing, is a very popular, storyline in movies. But it's to my understanding that it wasn't really, it was kind of unexplored territory in '73, which is a big reason that Serpico was such a big deal. It kind of continues to be because it was like the starting point for this. But, yeah, I do think, and while there are certainly, it's certainly an intriguing enough premise as we watch it play out. Like I said, there's no movie without the character of Serpico. Like, if you made this exact same movie, but with a different character that made different decisions than Serpico, but you had, like, the same premise, it's just not... I mean, yeah, obviously, if you change your main character, the movie's always going to be different. But I mean, this is a particular case where Serpico is the movie. And this, decent plot that we have, it's really... Yeah, I don't think the story itself is necessarily the strength of Serpico. It's all about this character. And I think that's the intent anyway, so... And I think that's another way you'll notice that they didn't seem to want to bother with enormously recognizable faces in the supporting cast. Like, obviously, actors like Tony Roberts are pretty good in it, who you might recognize from a lot of Woody Allen's movies, like his 70s and 80s movies. And there's John Randolph as the Superior, but he's been around, but you might most recognize him as Clark's dad in Christmas Vacation, is the head guy. And then you've got familiar faces sprinkled around in little cameos like Judd Hirsch and F. Murray Abraham are cops, but and Emma Walsh as well. But yeah, it's clear even in the casting to where it's like they really like there's really no other person to worry about in this movie than Serpico. Even the girlfriend becomes very sympathetic throughout as we watch her and she kind of takes it a bit above the usual tortured girlfriend / wife whatever role, where we really do become sympathetic with her having to watch Serpico crumble when she has like a genuine love for him and all that. So, and so yeah, and obviously the editor is Dede Allen, who I tragically forgot to mention when we talked about Dog Day Afternoon, who I think was most notable for editing Bonnie and Clyde, but she did a lot of amazing work. And it's like I was actually thinking about this, and it was like with Dede Allen and Thelma Schoonmaker and Sally Menke and like Margaret Sixel, it's like, are there any other better editors than women, come to think of it? It's like, and this is definitely another example of that. Like I said, there are definitely some great suspenseful scenes, which comes down to the editing as well as Lumet's direction, obviously. There is, like, the moment when, towards the end, right before he gets shot, when he's got his hand caught in the door, is a really intense scene. And then there's stuff to where it's not even an action scene, if you will, but it's like, the way Lumet shoots it to where it's like, whenever it's kind of Serpico by himself, it's like a wide shot. But then in like the same scene, if Serpico's in a wide shot, the cops that are like coming down on him are in like close up, which does really well at building tension. But yeah, overall, I do think it's strong, and I do understand that it's like one of the quintessential cop movies. I never quite had much passion for it outside of Pacino's performance, which I know, like I said, is the whole movie, but even so, I do, yeah, I can totally understand it, and obviously that is owed to the legendary protagonist that's the face of it, but Serpico is a movie that I was just I've never quite been in love with. It's never a movie that's like, I'm never always, like, fully engrossed in it at all times. Which is why if you don't kill me, would take something like Copland, where it's able to have characters that interesting with all these different angles, that we get to watch kind of progress in different directions in the movie, but it's got so many different things going on that all kind of just shape this whole world that it's set in. I just thought what Mangold did with this was really impressive. So I'm definitely more keen to watch Copland over and over and over again, because it just pulls me in every time. And I can't quite say that about Serpico, but I mean, there's certainly, you know, its reputation is fine. It's perfectly fine to me. I totally understand the appeal, but for me, Copland is where it's at, so yes. I think I know the next one I'm going to do is one I was going to do last month. I kept building up and then never actually did. Because we ended up doing so many other things. But then, yeah, we've got all that award stuff coming up. There's a lot of reviews coming also. There's going to be 4, I think, on this coming one. So there's that. And then I'll be seeing Molly's Game next week. So, for sure this time. So, there's all of that. So, yes, until all that stuff